You're listening to SaskScapes, a podcast featuring the stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. Welcome back. This is part 2 of my conversation with 6 artists who push the boundaries of artistic expression through their work. I'm Kevin Power. Enjoy the continuation of part 1.
There's something that, sorry, I didn't mean to interject. There's something that keeps being brought up in this conversation, which is the difference between varying degrees of public and private context, and sort of this notion of exposure. And I think it's worth talking about because one of the comments that was said about the work was, well, it's fine if it's in a gallery. Like, put it in a gallery. Why not there? Like, why outside? Why here? And I think there's even that interview on The Current, they were talking about the purpose of public art and how that's somehow different than contemporary art, has a different function and purpose in most minds, or at least the minds of people interviewed. And I personally, I don't feel the same way. I feel that to have this exposure, to put that work in the public, is where it belonged the most. It wouldn't have made as much sense in the gallery. And I'm hoping to do a new rendition of the work that'll make that really opaque. But I think that it's that exposure of putting something like that that's from art history. It's a found object. It's referencing other works. The word compressions comes from César, his work, and that's a reference there. And then obviously Duchamp's work. And then just like the social aspect, the labor aspect, that's all new in terms of, in reference to a lot of other works that are placed around the city that aren't having that same prerogative. And I think that exposure is what makes people know or familiar with these different things in art history. If we keep tucking it away in gallery spaces and refusing to expose it to the public, saying that the gallery is an elite safe space, that maintains that elitism that people are critiquing within art.
Exactly. Yeah. Are you receiving additional funding for said reinterpretation of
No, not at all. Not at all. Every penny I have goes back into my practice. And that's another thing, too, is my husband and I were talking about it, and I don't feel guilty about being paid for my work. It rarely ever happens. This was the first public this was the first public commission I've ever even applied for, and I was very lucky to get it. But I also worked hard to get it. I worked very hard. I spent 3 months putting together that application. Not to mention all of the research that Adrian was talking about that artists put into their work. So I don't feel a need to apologize for that, and that money goes directly back into my practice all the time. So I think that having to feel like I have to defend myself before this sort of a public audit when, like we were saying, all these other possibly more dubious sources of public money are being funded all the time, I don't think that it's appropriate. I don't think that I want to encourage it.
And that money also goes back into the community.
Yeah. That's right.
Home Depot, the hardware stores, lunch at the restaurants around the place. So that money, not only goes to the artist, it stays in the community. But so I think that's another aspect.
Well, and that's a valid point because when I was part of the original cast of Phantom of the Opera for 7 years. When we first started hitting the scene in Canadian cities, theater people were outraged because the ticket prices, one ticket price was more than an entire season at their regional theater, and people would say, well, this is just going to completely obliterate small theater, when in fact it did the opposite. It brought people into the theater that otherwise would have never gone to theater, and sure, they were not going to go to regional theater and see something on the level of Phantom of the Opera, but they got inside the doors and thought, wow, I think I want to see more live production. So it actually was generating it generated income. It did the opposite effect to what people thought that it would have. But on the topic of money, do you feel like is art at jeopardy of losing funding, both on a local level and on a national level?
I think it always is. You know, if you take a look at the hierarchy of cuts, mind you, interestingly enough, in this federal government, although it hasn't got any increase in funding, it hasn't been cut, which everybody thought it would be, and it still probably might be. But yes, you know, it's always at the bottom of the whole hierarchical scale. Art is, because it's the first thing that I think everybody thinks can go in any time. When in fact, you know, I personally believe that it should be at the top, because it's what creates communities, what creates dialogue, it's what holds communities together. It's culture, it's building culture, it's all those things that are important to us as human beings living on this planet. And yet we get so stuck in the sort of the capital sort of idea of art and what it is, which is, you know, it is a reality of what it is in today's society, but at the same time, there's so much more that it can be. But yes, it's always at risk of being cut, when in fact it's such a little part of the real sort of public.
Well, and art stimulates the economy. It's been proven to stimulate economy. So it's actually a really great investment. Speaking even from maybe we'll say an extremely conservative perspective, it's a great investment. Yeah. And I think it's actually an international phenomenon, this having to constantly defend culture and the arts and funding being sort of like cut on a global level. Like when I was in Iceland, there was that temperature I had people there there were people from South Africa, there were people from Ireland, there were people from the States, there were people obviously living and working in Iceland, and the story was the same. No matter what country people were from, it was the arts were struggling, constantly in jeopardy, and even these places like Iceland that are incredible tourist industry, and what brings people is the culture, is the architecture, is the art that's there, and yet still they're struggling to get, you know, any matter of public funding to make work. And I think that's really backward thinking, because it is an investment, it's an economical one.
Well, Jean-Sébastien and I just came back from Portland in terms of working on a project there out of necessity. But Portland has a fantastic public art program going on in that city. And I don't know if it's partially because of that, but the atmosphere in that city is so different. You know, what do they say? It's a place where young people go to retire, or something like that. But just walking the streets, and you know, on every corner and every slum, there's a piece of art. It makes a difference to the atmosphere of the city. The sky up boxes around the city, for me, I smile every time I go by one of those. I think there's something, you know, that's beautifying, that's introducing thoughts and people's hand into the public, you know, into our sort of man-made world or mechanicized world. And so for me, I think that it's one of those discussions. I think it's really important is how committed are cities to creating space and opportunities for artists to truly make a city, you know, world class, as they all like to say, and all that sort of stuff.
And the other thing that is interesting of all this talk about public art is that the city just approved a 1% for arts policy just 2 weeks before this happened. So it might have been a reaction to this person too, to that.
Well, I think
so. There's a lot of layers to this story.
Like it's May, there's just barely any green anywhere. Like people get grumpy at the end of winter. It's like, hey, it's like people get grumpy. It's okay, but like we live in a place where it's winter for 6 months. It's winter 6 months of the year. Like half our lives is winter. But again, and then when we realize that in the spring and we see something we don't like, and it's like that piece of sculpture there, well, that's art. That's open season. Anybody can trash art. You know, anybody can go after something like art because it's open, right?
Are you saying it would be better received in July?
Well, I think people are distracted doing other things too.
But I mean, like people can get upset about whatever. Like there's a time that people get grumpy too, and like.
Mm-hmm. But what I find interesting too is that we have other recycled materials in the city. Some of the pieces that are rusted metal is recycled from places that they dispose them, and artists go there and do this transformation of this piece. What is the difference between one piece and the other? Because one, I cannot, I don't know what part from what material from what part of industrial thing is that it was transformed into something. Or this one, I feel guilty about being one of those that don't think about this work. Yeah. I just think it's fantastic.
I think it's an age-old question of labor and skill and time invested, and it's just sort of like I think, a little bit of a dated concept of having to have a direct correlation between looking at something and being able to assess that it took a certain amount of talent and skill, immediately visually being able to assess that it did. And I don't think all of the best art necessarily comes out of like a direct sort of tactile, material invested skill. Like this idea of talent is really troubling to me, because there's all sorts of ways to express things through materials. And one of the things that keeps getting noted on a lot of these blogs and things is they'll link out to my website and she can paint. Why did she do this? Well, that is a good question. Why did I do it? So it comes back to beauty, and I don't think that all work should be beautiful. I don't think that life is completely beautiful and democratic, so why should art represent anything other than life? It shouldn't be always utopian, and certainly it can be, and sometimes it's lovely when it is. But I don't think that that's the mandate of art, is to represent something really palatable and pleasant.
Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Just a quick reminder that the SaskScapes podcast is available for free on your favorite podcast app, or you can stream it from your browser. Check out the show notes for the link. On the SaskScapes homepage, you'll notice something new under the logo called SaskScapes Plus. You can't miss it. There's a big button saying support with a heart icon next to it. I'd love it if you could click on that button and help keep this podcast series going. When SaskScapes launched in May 2014, it was the first podcast in the province celebrating arts, culture, and heritage. In fact, you'd have been pretty hard-pressed to find any Saskatchewan podcasts. So I'd like to think that we paved the way. It's been because of your support that this podcast is now in its 9th year. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
But the other thing at issue here is also public space, which hasn't really come up. And the way that, how we feel invested in public space, how we feel invested in our neighborhoods, and that kind of stuff. I mean, like Alejandro alluded to the ads. Like, I'd way rather see your found compressions than some of the ads I come across that are billboards or bus shelter ads or and whatever.
They don't ask the community. If
nobody gives but nobody blinks an eye, right? Yes. So for me, that's an interesting question to ask people. So like, how come you're okay with this billboard, but you're not okay with this? Or how come...
or with Walmart that takes all the small business from your community. I'm okay with that, but then I'm not okay that I'm okay also that all my business in my small community are going to go out of business because Walmart or this big box store. So there's a lot of layers, and that's the beauty.
How much you spend on building a road?
Yeah.
There's a road that the work is on, and that has to be maintained for X amount of...
I had it said in one of my meetings at the office because they were looking for ways to just do something with the roads and the potholes, and I said, well, fill them with public art. And drive around.
Well, you can do the opposite of the compressions is those expansions by Cesar, and it turns out the expansions have already occurred, and there's garbage spread about the city all year round by people driving
or the wind,
whatever,
the wind blowing
and everybody throwing stuff out the
window. The birds taking out of the garbage containers, and the wind blowing it out away, and then it's in front of your lawn, and then you just look it, and then you expect the city to pick it up, grab it, and throw it in the garbage. It's just your responsibility too, But
if I pay like $40 or $50 in taxes, then I want to not have to pick up in my neighborhood because I could just be mad. Mm-hmm. Like if I pay $40 for anything, I want to be able to be mad about it. If I don't like it, and I'm like, this is $40. If you can't take it back, then you should be mad about it. So that makes some
it occurs to me that not everybody moves through life constantly seeing inspiration and I was watching you, Alejandro, when we came into and you picked up the magazine that was out on the table and said that's beautiful. I observe artists and I can see artists taking things in constantly and feeding off of that. Not everybody does that. Not everybody wants to. Not everybody has that built into their personality. So how do we reach out to that person?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways you can engage in public art, and I think there has to be room for every way, from the individual artist creating works to collaborations with the community. Like I know that in the project that Jean-Sébastien and I are working on right now, we engage the particular public greatly in order to create that piece, and in fact, it's a reflection of their desires and stuff like that. So of course the aesthetics of that is going to represent them, not necessarily us as individual artists, although our hand is greatly in there and greatly influences the piece. That's one way. But yet that shouldn't discount the fact that, the same with SkyUp, in terms of engaging the youth in creating work within the city, giving them a sense of purpose within the city. I think that things like that, there are many different ways of going about it, and they all should be actively engaged at all times within the cityscapes. And I think the individual artist too, with creating works, creates an opportunity and a space for us to build and understand and move forward. So I think in combination with all the various ways, and then I think in Saskatoon that does happen to some degree. I think, of course, like anything, as an artist, which should happen more, which would create more of a dialogue and create more of understanding and more of an appreciation within.
It just occurred to me that I think it would be tragic, and most people would agree, if the work that you're doing, Tammy, if we were to censor the youth who are trying to find their voice and focus through artistic expression.
They get censored.
Sure
they do. In fact, almost all those boxes the city has, they have dictated the themes. We're going to paint one that for Keeley's Street Meat Festival in the summer, that the artist has total control over what's going to go on there. So that's one out of 56, I think.
So how are the others being censored?
Well, they're just a theme, right? So we have to work within some guidelines.
Right. Okay.
So it's never really quite what they want, and even in their own personal work, I mean, they can do whatever they want. But we have a gallery, and people come in to look for art, and we work with a lot of Aboriginal youth, and we'll get people saying, Oh no, that's not what I want. I want like the warrior on the horse, and that's too dark. That's too dark. And that's their work, right? Yeah. That's what they want. That's what they're trying to discover. So we're working with these young people to, see that that's some of the public is going to think that, say that, feel that. So you have to sort of, you don't cater to it, but you got to know it's there, and you still got to develop what you want, right? And then our graffiti artists who are trying to do their sort of urban style art. It is the same thing, it's too out there, it's too something. So they're still doing it. They're still, but not a lot of people. Not as many people are appreciating it as we would hope. But we're still putting it out there.
So there are limits.
There are still limits, yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think it's good. I mean,
right.
I would wish that that. There is that. Well, my people are kind of they're emerging, but they're also not even ready to defend some of their work because they're not even there yet. But they know what they like, they know what they want to do, and a lot of them know sort of where they want to go with their art, and some don't, and some just want to do pretty things, and that's fine, right? That's their choice.
There is a kind of misconception, too, that somehow you need to have an understanding of what you're doing to do it. Yeah. Like, for it to be okay to make anything, you should know why. And it's that's not true.
It's part of the process.
I hardly ever know what the hell I'm doing for my work. And once I do it, I start figuring out what I'm talking about. Right. That's how I work. Right. I'm not... That's valid because I can do it, and I do it. It's valid. It's there. It's I bring something into the world, and it's my utterance, and I'm allowed to do it, and I'm allowed to talk however I want. That's part of the privilege of being part of an open society. I can say whatever I want. I can say shit right now. You can cut that out if you want. It doesn't matter, but it's done, Do you want me to say that again? It doesn't matter. I don't have to respond to, we don't have to create these things that people are I've prepared you don't have to prepare a statement before you have an idea to do something. If you want to dig a hole because you want to learn about it, and then you realize that art is a space where digging a hole means people will ask themselves other questions about it. It's that's enough. Art about spreading things to the wind, has been like developed in like random procedure art from the like 1940s. You know, there's like historical. Anyway.
But even if we were to bring like Adrian's, David, Michelangelo's David, and put it on the corner of 33rd, there'd probably be some people who are upset because of the nudity.
And they put a tarp.
But I guess
not now. People would be lining up and paying mega.
No, they would be complaining. They would be complaining that the penis is not in proportion. So there's always something.
In the Royal Ontario Museum, there's a big fig leaf that Queen Victoria had commissions to cover up the David's penis.
Yeah. I don't mean that to denigrate or to say that people are uneducated. What I mean is that everybody has a different opinion.
They don't have to be.
And that's okay. That's fine.
But it's based on experience too. Like I remember when I moved here, I felt neutral in a lot of these things because, and I perhaps shouldn't say this, but it feels that what is happening here. I saw it happening where I came from 50 years ago, when there was an economic boom and everything started in transition. Well, I'm not saying that we are 50 years behind. I'm just saying that transition is occurring here in the province. So I neutrally see these changes and all these communities trying to flourish, and then some others just want to hold back with what they have or what they know because they feel safe. So it's a big fear of change, and I think changes are great, and I embrace them all.
We're talking a lot about public space, and what Laura and Tammy both were touching on is this idea of spaces that are owned publicly, but that we operate in privately. And some things within a public space are private, but they feel public. And so this is a lot about boundaries and about shared spaces. Artists, for example, street artists, young graffiti artists, a lot of whom do incredible work. There's a label, a value put on that immediately. And if it's done in a public place, that's like a publicly owned place, but it feels private. Or in other cases, like the Warman Wall, it's a private property, but it's done so publicly that people backlash against it. So I think it's what people consider valuable, but it's also these spaces that are sort of liminal and they're hard to define. There's an artist that we're going to be screening a documentary for the Street Meat Festival that Tammy touched on, who is a street artist, and his name is Rhodesworth. He's from Quebec, and he does really lovely work. But what he does is he's working with stencils on road lines, so it's like this totally strange space where it's like these fantastic, beautiful things that are happening on the street with paint, and they're so seamless that they just smooth right into it. And people adore them, but because it's public property, he actually was in a lawsuit for like $300,000 in order to like defend his work, and he was trying to decide.
But the public pay for him to be out.
Yeah, well, I mean, he does fabulous work, right? And people were behind it, but a lot of people backlashed against it. So it's another. I'm very interested in these works that sort of push these ideas of what is public and what is private. I think Laura's work does that oftentimes too, like these sort of your experiences that you've had with your photo installations that people have had different varying degrees of reactions to.
Sort of temporary installations that have been up for a longer period of time. Like in one context, like I presented the same work at the Works Festival in Edmonton and the Street Performers Festival in Grand Prairie when I was living there. Exact same work. Oh, everybody loves it, fabulous. Lots of questions, so engaged. And then you put it in front of the, a civic building for a couple months and people, what is this trash? What's going on here? So context is, and that's what I mean by context is, I keep coming back to that, but context is everything. And I think, someone is expecting to encounter something out of the ordinary at an art festival, at a street festival, and they're expecting it to be on the street. And in a way, we're giving artists permission to take the street over for a certain amount of time, right? And so I think with public art, like your piece or other work that stays in a location for a longer period of time, I think that's a really valuable question to ask and a really good conversation to have. Why is this billboard okay? Compressions is not. Why was my work okay in the context of a festival, but not okay, for a couple months in front of a civic building? That's a discussion we should be having. And as Saskatoon grows and, the living becomes more dense and we're all on top of each other and these public spaces become more inhabited, and everybody's going to want a piece of deciding how that plays out. We got to talk about it.
It's ownership too, Yeah. This is my territory. I own it. And if you don't ask permission to me to put that there, you're gonna just hear me, and it's just that sense of ownership that some neighborhoods have, and which is a good thing. Like we got a lot of great feedback. Like the community is in change, and they felt that we need to just listen to them a little bit more about gentrification. So that's a piece of information that, because of that piece of art, we have to supply to the neighborhood planning people. And then, so there's always the positive aspects of these things that we sometimes don't look or overlook, and it's important to just have that open mind to just look at things from different angles. And these people that don't like the art, I just challenge them to just come with an open heart and open mind to see, okay, I don't understand it, I don't like it, it might be called art, but I do a lot of things also that other people don't like, so it's okay for now,
I think that's a major point, is just like that it's tolerance. It's like, what do we tolerate from each other? It's like, these are things, some people are bothering to make something for individuals to see, and whether they want to tolerate that or not is a question they can ask themselves with anything. But like, public art is a major point, that it's unsolicited in the sense that people are just walking, with their groceries or whatever.
People even
but
complain.
Will they be tolerant of something they see or not is a totally individual choice. Mm-hmm. But like, we can celebrate it in different ways, and like that's where our agency comes in,
And people even complain about the other person's way of dressing or the haircut, or, like, it's human kindness. I don't know why, but that's what it is.
But I think it's a matter of being critical of something and not just eliminating, like, beginning at the conversation of whether or not it's art, to me, is inane. Like, let's just pretend that I called it art, so now if it's on trial as a work. We take collectively and decide with whatever arsenal we have, is it good art? Is it effective art? Mm-hmm. Now, there's a conversation that I'm interested in. If we start already at the proposition of it being art, and we say, well, no, is it art or is it garbage? Which was a poll that the Star Phoenix had, and people were submitting.
Oh, really?
Which is too funny, because it is garbage.
Oh, but it's not. It's recycling, and the work is all the more effective. But no, it's very funny to me. It's comical, but it's also horrifying in some ways, because 76% of people said garbage, and I say,
sorry,
I would hope that 100% of people would just ignore that conversation altogether and move on. Okay, like, I never once said this was an amazing piece of work. I stand behind having done it, and I feel good about having done it. I've learned a lot, and I think it'll lead to other investigations. But it's to everyone who's involved with it now to decide whether or not it was effective. But to decide whether or not it's art, I mean, that was a question that we proposed in 1917, which is almost 100 years ago, with Duchamp's first found, his first ready-made. I think that's inane. Let's get past it.
Yeah, I have to disagree with that, because I think what is art is a really valid question. And so what is art? I hate it. I'm going to tarp it or light it on fire. I've had people have threatened to light my sculpture, public art, on fire. So at least you didn't get that. But, I think that's a valid question. And I think it for me, standing there trying to talk about a car that I turned into a terrarium, had a lot of interesting conversations, and I had people walk away say, I don't really agree with you, but I kind of see what you're trying to do. So I don't like looking down on people who don't have the same knowledge of art history that I do, and I don't like the conversation to be, well, you just need more education because you'd understand it. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, we all need education, okay? And like, I wish that every person knew as much as a 5-year-old European kid does about art in Canada. I do. But at the same time, like, if we can make it a safer space instead of like, you just don't know, why don't we say, okay, well, let's talk about it. Okay, so there's this guy Duchamp, and he had a urinal, and he put it in an exhibition, and he signed his name on it, and that's what started this whole chain of events to leading up to this. Yeah. And the person can at least walk away and say, well, I don't agree with you, but I kind of get it a little bit more, right?
No, I completely agree with you, and I don't think I was meaning to imply that.
No, but it's a threat. I think some of the comments that have been made can be interpreted that way, and just because this isn't meant as a discussion just for artists, I think it's important to acknowledge that,
Totally. I think you're super valid, and I guess quickly what I had intended was that, like, let's say, for example, I walk into a cafe and I look at what's on the walls of the cafe. Deep inside of me, I might say, F this, it's not art. Like, this is garbage to me. But I'm not going to start there. I'm not an artist from a different perspective from myself, made this work and put it out in the world and said, this is art. I really appreciate what I'm doing. I want you to appreciate it as well. I can then look at it and critically say, well, by my standards, it's not something that I am personally interested in. But if I came at that work and just said, this is not art, that would, to me, not be a valid discussion. So not in the sense that, like, every single person should know what a ready-made is. Like, good God, why don't you?
Mm-hmm.
More like...
But I just want to clarify that for people who are listening to this who don't have the background, because it'd be really easy to get your hackles up and say, well,
totally,
that bunch of elitist whatevers,
and I do think the majority of artists really do take the time and effort to actually let people know what their work is about. And I think most of the artists I know,
if you're working in public,
you're
working in public because you want to do that, right?
But I also like to flip that around a bit and put the onus back on the viewer too. Is that why does it always have to be the artist who has to explain what the work is? Shouldn't the onus be on the viewer to actually, if whatever their reaction to the work is to for themselves educate themselves? And I think that's important too. Yeah. Because I think it also puts the agency back on the person to be able to live in this world as we all do, and take responsibility in terms of understanding their world and the environment they live in.
And it's respecting and dignifying them as a viewer, like saying that you are smart enough to engage. It's not being pejorative and saying, like, this is beyond you. I can't, you can't begin to understand it. Like, I mean, I don't understand my work at all half the time before I've really had time to, like, sit down and investigate it. And even when I think I've figured it out, then there's a million other questions and ways to approach it. And someone else can bring something to a work for me as much as I can bring something to them. So that's a way of respecting a viewer, is to give them that agency.
And the story of the work evolves. And that's what art is supposed to do in many ways, is to help the story of that piece evolve. Like as Jean-Sébastien said, often when we create work, we don't necessarily know what the heck we're doing. and we do it, and we put it out there. Then we start getting all these feedbacks as to what it is, and it grows that story, and it will grow well into the future. And by the time that we're long gone, our work will probably have a totally different story 100 years from now. And I think that's interesting too. And so again, it puts the onus back on the viewer to be interested. And if they're interested, whether that's in a negative or positive way, I certainly would want to go out and find out why am I having this negative feeling to this? I know most people don't really
but you
take the time to try to find that out.
Right? This is the thing, like, the work is something. Like, it takes up a place, and that's exposure. And it doesn't need anything else. Like, that's art. Like, art is its own thing. Like, you put it there, and it's its own thing. It's what it is. It's art. Like, if somebody decides to place an object anywhere, and they've got the intention of it, people are faced with it. It's like there's a sculpture of a book in front of a library. That's interesting. It also looks like it might be a bench. Mm-hmm. I can sit on it. I don't ask myself about the intention necessarily when faced with an object that is there in front of me. I can just work with it, and that's everything. Like, you see a doorknob, you don't ask for the intention of the doorknob. You know to turn the handle to get through the door. Like, art is itself, like, presenting a message, and we're exposed to it. You don't have to like it, or but the exposure is enough. After that, this kind of discussion that occurs around it is not superfluous, but I mean.
But the flip side of that exposure, right, is like we're talking about the public, but also this was Keeley's first public piece. Fantastic! How amazing that we have a program in the city that gives a young artist the chance to learn about public art in this way, like trial by fire, I guess. But, I mean, everything I've learned has been through experience too. And I think people come to art sometimes assuming, that we, everything, there's a very specific, that it's not open to interpretation or whatever, but also that this person, has a million years of experience and knows exactly how it's all going to play out and that kind of stuff. So I think maybe we can also come from this specific instance and conversation to like, okay, there are young artists in the city that need support and need space to try out ideas and fantastic.
Maybe we need to have regular town hall meetings on a monthly basis where it's just open forum to have these kinds of discussions.
People don't go.
That's not true. People do go, but people talk about it like amongst each other. Like, they do sit at coffee shops and say, what the hell is this? You know, about anything, right? And that's, like, their space to bring it out, and it spreads word in the newspapers. And however, and obviously, squeaky wheels.
But I think it would be, I mean, then you guys ought to start hanging out at more coffee shops so that you can start being a participant in the conversation, because I think this dialogue is hugely valuable, and I think that a lot of people listening are already hearing things that they simply wouldn't have imagined, that half of you don't know, that you all don't know where you're going with your piece when you start. Who would know that?
Well, I do workshops in schools, and I present ideas. Actually, it's kind of funny, but I present ideas by a sculptor that I really like, Robert Morris, who does this kind of felt sculptures, and it's like showing gravity and chance occurrence. And so he throws work around the gallery and leaves it on the ground, and it's like pieces of brass, pieces of felt. I was in Chicago, and I visited one of his works, and the guy next to me, who was the security guard, was like, "What the hell is this?" He stands there every day with the work, right? And he's like, what is this chance occurrence stuff? So I explained the artist statement, and then he went over and read. I was like, oh, I really love this work. I'm here from Saskatoon, and I'm like so pleased to see this, because I teach kids about how, like, being able to place objects around a room randomly is art. And it's been an idea that people valued enough that 50 years ago, like in 1964, somebody brought forward, and it's enshrined as like this kind of placeholder for that idea in at the Metropolitan or the Chicago Art Institute, as like something that this idea is valid as art. It was like, look what this thinking brought forward, and I try to go to kids and say, let's take this bag of stuff, which is literally bits of string and cardboard recycling materials and plastic, and we just throw it around the room. And it's like, for the next 10 minutes, everything we spread about the floor is art. And we look at it, and you can see them actually change their understanding. It's like, for 5 minutes, they're like, why do we have all this garbage? And it's like, we're going to make some random artwork. And they're like, random artwork? What's that? And you're like, I'll show you. And we spread it out, and you can feel that people's like energy change. And it's like, wait a minute, this can be something else. And it's like, everything can be something else. So we just have to like keep trying. It's like sounding out. Like, that's what we're doing. That's what the art is. Like, the art being there is sounding out the idea. Like, people walking up to the everything. Like, the same way all the other built material around us is sounding ideas, right? Like, it bounces off us and we feed back. And so... You know, rambling kind of.
No. When I was looking at when I looked at the picture of Found Compressions wrapped in tarp, my own artistic sensibility looks at it and goes, I wonder if the person who took exception to your work knows that what they've just done is actually art.
But it's been done before.
Because the statement is, I choose to ignore that. You know, it's I don't want to look at this because it's ugly. That in and of itself is a huge statement. Therefore, they're a profound artist and they don't know it.
Perhaps he's launching an artistic career.
We should have brought him.
It's easy to step up onto something that's made to place another. It's like copying is a form of flattery in that sense. Like, it's a lot easier to walk into a gallery and say, I could do that, and then go and it's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, do it. You know, like, that's art. Like, there's nobody who's not allowed to step up.
Have you ever met the fellow who wrapped your art?
I haven't. I know a lot of people who know the fellow, but I don't know. It doesn't seem very useful to engage with him. Like, I specifically call him irate taxpayer, because it seems to me that he's prompted a lot of discussion, and for that, I mean, it's super valuable. I think it would have happened regardless, but not at the level that it's happened without him being a catalyst. But I don't know if it's super helpful to engage with him on the level he's chosen to, just because there's been so many opportunities for, as Alejandro was saying, for him to discuss with me or with anyone else in other ways. Like, that panel that was beside the work, which had a short description, also had a link to the blog, a scan code to get to it. It was like half a block away from the library. If you don't have a computer, it had my email address, and you could have. I tried to make it as accessible. Easy as possible to get in touch with me, to talk to me about the work. I had put there that I would post things to my blog so that we could have dialogue. But I find that way really hard to engage with. It's never worked for me before, and I think it's time to reevaluate it.
We have another piece. Like this year, last year was a very interesting for the city because we have this other, the piece that wrap other art, but that had the permission of the artist, and that was part of our, when they got accepted, we said, well, you need to look for the artist permission because they have copyright and it's moral rights and all those that conversation. But we put another an artist from England with local artists in collaboration with local artists did a piece in the Persephone Theater, a light piece. That is the first time that we just go in the public realm like that. And what I find interesting is that people think it's an advertisement for the plays that are in the Persephone Theater.
But I have to disagree. I think that, if I were to rethink this, I might have brought that person into this conversation, or there may be another podcast that has to happen, because I think as valid as what you were all saying, that voice needs to be heard, and I would quite frankly would give him the platform to say it, because I think you guys could benefit from hearing what's going on inside.
Sure. I think what he represents is super valid.
Sure. Yes.
And maybe I would get other community members involved. But I think maybe just because of this sort of strange, and maybe this is just overthinking it, but the strange political seeming nature of his engagement, it seems to me encouraging. But that said, what he represents, the Mayfair community, the sort of we'll say non-art persona, that is super valid and super important, and I would like to hear what that person has to say. Absolutely. And I have heard people have been emailing me directly. I've taken the time to directly respond to them as well, but to give them a platform like this, I think that's great.
I'm dying to ask this question to all of you. Is there a line to be drawn in the sand when it comes to art? Is there a point in which any of you look at something and go, okay, that's too far. That breaks. That's no longer being groundbreaking. That's inappropriate.
I don't think it's so much of drawing a line, but I think that there are some things, I'm a performance artist as well. There are some things that I think about that I want to do, and then I think about it and I say, no, I don't want to do that. Quite simply, one, because, and that's a personal choice, and it goes through my own editing process within. And so there be what it may, maybe it relates to Indigenous protocols or a number of the things that I just won't do it because I don't have the rights to do it or stuff like that. But if I had the rights to do it, I could do it. So there's a whole other sort of elemental thing there. But I think that artists, for the most part, I believe, self-censor themselves. That's, again, the research we do. There are some things that we will do and some things we won't. Sometimes we'll deliberately push it past the lines, and maybe we don't know we're actually doing that at the time either. So I think I think that there is some things that and also context and time, and too, I can give a number of examples, but there are fine lines, and I think that artists often make the choice to cross or not cross those lines. Right. When you cross them, I think it creates a really interesting dialogue, but you also have to be prepared to take the heat for it, and stuff like that, and be reasonable about how you do that, as I would expect anyone criticizing to be reasonable as well. Because often, and I see this argument from the taxpayer sort of perspective is unreasonable, because it seems to be just really heavy-handed, it's like, this is bad, bad, bad. Has he sat down and talked with you as a human being face to face, you have a whole different set of communication factors. We live in a sort of a world of anonymity through media, where you can basically, say anything you want without fear of repercussion or for the person punching you in the throat. So I think it's again, it's those fine lines, and I think artists for the most part will censor themselves if they feel this goes too far. But sometimes you want to create that controversy. Maybe it's in a topic that's so important in our society in this time, in this place, that you have to say it, and then you have to cross those lines, and there's a reason for that. We may not necessarily know what those reasons are, but there's something there.
So do you all set your own moral compass as far as, and I mean, I'm not talking about breaking the boundaries into doing something illegal, but I mean, do you all set your own moral compass as far as how far is too far?
I think so. And I think, like, there's civil disobedience and like, there's societal norms, and sometimes you do stuff that isn't permitted, and, like, that can be an expression as well. Just like, you know, you go appeal some law. Like, if you're a lawyer, you know, you can go appeal some law. That, I mean, the democracy is resetting boundaries, right? Like, we agree on something together. We change the rules if we don't feel it's right, you know? Like, we make up those limits. And art is pushing on what's the edge of... Some people are pushing at what's the edge of what we're allowed to do. And some people are pushing a different, you know, weight, and they're interested in elevating a discussion on, you know, what's pretty and ugly, okay, and what's heavy and not, and like the limitations are like what we agree on together. But like, I actually think anything can be art. Does that mean every day I'm like everything is art? Not always, but like and I have this trouble where, like, as working with performance work, like, I know people who've endangered their lives to make work, and I know there's artists who die making their work, you know, and should they be able to? I think, yeah, I think like everything should be art, just like I should be tolerant of everyone, you know, like I don't agree with politics, I don't agree with going to war. I'm still tolerant of other humans. Like, I'm tolerant of other, like, soldiers who have gone and shot people and because of political, situations. I don't think I want that to be art. I don't want that to be around. Like, I don't want politics of starvation to exist. But, like, do I think if an artist wanted to starve themselves to death, it's okay? Like, do they want to own their utterance? Do they want to be what they are trying to say? Like, that's the line that we get. So, like, I think we should be able to do that. And do we have to face it as a public? Like, yeah, we have to face each other, you know, like, whatever we're saying.
I don't think there'll ever be a resolution to this conversation, and I think that's probably a good thing. Yeah. The second we arrive at a conclusion, we're probably in more danger than we realize.
Yes.
Exactly. Is there anything, as we draw this conversation to a close for now, that each of you want to say to listeners about understanding who you are as artists? Is there something you want to leave a listener with?
I have one thing. Mm-hmm. Just that when we're making art, I mean, as people have described, it's an utterance, right? Like, you do a bunch of research, you think stuff through, you experiment, and you're really just presenting one point of view through your view, right? Through your lens. I view art as a lens that I see the world through, and I think I just invite anybody who's listening to the podcast to try to do the same thing, right? Like, just, this is my utterance, this is the way I view it, what do you bring to it, and let's have a discussion, rather than, you know, I'm not trying to impose anything on you. Don't try to impose anything on me. Let's just have a conversation.
I will add to that the practice of art is very difficult in the sense that as every other human being, we need to pay bills. We need to pay family if we have children and all those. It's very hard because research doesn't get paid, and I think people should be a little bit more tolerant to artists that choose to practice a career that sometimes is seen as fairy and is not respected as it should be, like other professions that are more mainstream. I encourage people really to just put themselves in the shoes of an artist and accept the fact that they're also artists that choose not to be one.
Yeah, and I think that's the same thing, is that as artists, we are a part of the community. We're not something outside of the community. You know, we're your spouses, we're your neighbors, we're your
We're
friends.
Watching you.
Just kidding. Exactly. And so we are part of the community. We contribute as much as anyone else to the community, both economically and more so creatively. And that's our choosing as artists, our discipline, our work, our life's work. And so I think that often within these discussions, artists almost seem as the isolated sort of individual who's come into the community to cause all sorts of havoc. Well, that's not the case. We are part of the community, So I think that that's important to realize and support as we support everybody else in their chosen roles in their lives.
I look forward to all of you continuing to have a profound impact on the city and beyond with your work. Thank you so much. This conversation has been invaluable, and I've waited a long time to make it happen, and I'm glad that we could. So thank you, and I hope it continues. I hope it continues.
Thanks for listening. The SaskScapes podcast is created by Kevin Power as part of the Culture Days Animateur program operated by SaskCulture. Funding to the cultural sector is provided through the Saskatchewan Lotteries Trust Fund for Sports, Culture and Recreation. If you want to hear more of these podcasts or to see the great work being done by other SaskCulture animateurs, please visit www.iheartculture.ca. Special thanks to Paved Arts in Saskatoon for their technical support. Music for SaskScapes is provided by Saskatchewan-born singer-songwriter Jeffrey Straker. There is no end to the stories to be told. So, until next time,